Hello, everyone, and welcome to this nearly Christmas history time. I think in 1 week exactly, today's Thursday, in 1 week exactly, it'll be Christmas. So I thought that today we would do talk a bit about Christmas and the solstice, because the day after tomorrow is the solstice, as far as I know. So we'll talk a bit about both of those things today. Um, and just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm hoping to have a video out either a Saturday or Sunday. If all goes well, I'll have uh, a video about winter solstices in Ireland um, on Saturday, and then I've one. I'm making one on Valencia. I'll probably delay that another week. Hi Wayne, Merry Christmas. I hope you're having lots of sun down in Australia. And I presume it's tomorrow there already. I presume it's the 19th, Friday the 19th, and that you're on your way to work. And it's probably less stormy than here. We actually had a lightning and thunderstorm this morning around 9 o'clock. Was it strange to have one in the morning? Strange to have one in the morning. And so people are coming on. Very warm here in the 19th. On holidays, very good, very good. Yeah, people are starting to get in the holiday spirit today. The kids get school kids get holidays tomorrow, so that's great. I can means next week I can lie in bed. I don't have to wake up at 7. Hi, Kat. Good to see you. Hope all is well in the states. Hi, Kira from Mayo. Did you have a thunderstorm this morning around 9 o'clock in the morning? Um, all is well with me. We've been changing windows, painting, and waxing the floor. So hopefully next month it's got delayed and delayed, and the people putting in the windows and doors where I live is very exposed. So they left some of the stuff out, and in the middle of the night it went crash and smashed. So that delayed everything. But we're hopefully next Monday it'll all be back in order, and we can actually cook for Christmas because our kitchen is full of stuff. It's very hard to to move. No thunderstorms in Mayo. Yeah, we had a really strange thunder and lightning storm at 9 o'clock in the morning. I had just dropped my girl down to the bus coming home. I heard a big crash. I was saying, "What's that?" And then 5 minutes later, there was lightning and another one. But it didn't rain much, fortunately. So I wanted, since Christmas is coming up and since the solstice is coming up, I wanted to start off discussing that tonight. So let's start talking about Christmas, some of the celebrations of Christmas. Um, it's funny when you talk about folklore. Many people, hi Jesse, nice to see you. When you talk about folklore, many people presume folklore as such goes way, 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 way back. But quite often it only goes 200 years, maybe 300 years back, because it changes. It changes, society changes, habits change, um, things change. Folklore, new folk activities get invented, other ones die out. Like down here, actually more in Cork, uh, I think it was on St. Bridget's. Hi, Paul, Iwa. Around St. Bridget's Day, they used to have something called Skellig Day, whereby if you were an unmarried person in your 20s, your friends could essentially kidnap you and someone and do lots of stuff to you, pretending that you were getting married. It was all good fun, I think, because the idea was that they would kidnap you and bring you to the Skelligs where you could get married. I don't know where that belief came from, and I don't think anyone actually would have gotten a boat and headed out to the Skelligs. But one folklore piece of folklore that is just about hanging on is the Wren Boys. They celebrated in Carsavine just about. I think they do it with much bigger in Dingle, and I think that there is in one or two parts of working class Dublin, they still do it. Uh, it's basically people dress up and they head out hunting the wren. Now, the poor old wren in folklore has got a bad reputation. There's a couple of stories. One is religious in that I think when Jesus was supposed to have been dying on a cross, a wren popped down on him and bit him or something like that. And so therefore it was cursed and it was a cursed bird. The other was that the birds were having, and this is what I learned as a kid, the birds were having a competition to see who could fly highest, and they're all flying high and high and high, and the wren cheated, and it it hid in the back of an eagle. The eagle flew as high as it could, and then the wren jumped off the eagle and flew higher and won, and got itself down. So people are supposed to go out hunting the poor old wren, which is a lovely little bird, but I think it's more about dancing, etc. And I remember about 15 years ago, my brother got married up in Mayo, and then in Mayo, in a wedding, I don't know if it's everywhere. Um, this was near Ballina, more or less near Ballina. Uh, sort of around midnight, all the wedding party as such was over. Is now disco, etc. Suddenly, these four or five guys dressed up in kind of straw costumes ran in and did a dance for about 10 minutes. All the people from Dublin are kind of going, "What the hell is going on?" Everyone from Mayo accepted it, but it's the same sort of costume that they would put on for hunting the wren. And something that's really important for Christmas in Ireland is Nullig na Women's Christmas, which is held on the Feast of Epiphany, the 6th of January. The pub restaurants around here are already putting up posters advertising their Nullig na celebrations. The idea is that the poor old housewife, the women who've done everything over Christmas, finally, after you know lots and lots and lots and lots of hard work, get treated by the men. Except somehow in the last 20 or 30 years, instead of like the father, the husband, the son, the brother doing everything at the home, it's suddenly become a big meal for women, for groups of women. It just shows you how folklore changes over time. I wondered, is Nolig Manor or Women's Christmas or anything like that celebrated elsewhere? Because I know in Southern Europe and large parts of Latin and South America, on the same day they'll celebrate the Feast of the Epiphany. It's a Catholic slash Christian feast, and many places will have what they call king's cakes, like fruit cakes, special ones, because the Feast of the Epiphany, as far as I know, I'm trying to remember my whatever it was, 15 years of Catholic education. The Feast of the Epiphany is when the three wise men or kings uh, turn up with those feasts for baby Jesus. So that's important in sort of Latin Europe and Latin America. Paul, years ago when I was working in London, I remember causing consternation to an English colleague who thought I said rent boys, not rent boys. Oh dear. Oh dear. That would have been most strange. And actually, it's funny because even though England and Ireland are quite close due to history, and nowadays we share a lot of culture with them, there are huge, huge differences, including at Christmas. We have Stephen's Day, not Boxing Day. If you ever come on holiday to Ireland and mention Boxing Day, people will probably get annoyed at you. We have St. Stephen's Day, which is a continuation of Christmas and it's for partying. And when I was young, I think until say about 30 to 1990s, it was very hard to get a drink to go to a pub on St. Stephen's Day because the pub, everything was closed 2 days a year: Good Friday and Christmas Day. But in Dublin, only the pubs that weren't unionized opened. So about 20% of them opened on St. Stephen's Day, and like most other stuff was closed. Now it's changed a lot. Um, Another big difference is the attitude to death. Irish people love a good party when somebody dies. Like when someone dies around here, um, suddenly people pop up and like they're showing you where to park the car. You'll see long queues into people's houses. You'll go in there, there'll be the family around the body, and there'll be loads of food. And if you know them well, you'll stay for a drink or 10. Uh, it's a it's a big Irish funerals are very big, very long, and they're immediate. Like 2 or 3 days after someone dies, the funeral starts. Whereas in England, the funerals can take weeks and weeks and weeks. My cousin is lives in London. I remember having a long conversation with his wife, and she thought it very odd that, like, where in Ireland, if someone important dies, you'll drop everything and go to the funeral, even if you're in London. Whereas her attitude was like, but you have to give people time to organize. She just couldn't understand this of, dropping everything, traveling back. People will come back from the States for weddings, of not for weddings, for funerals. It's a very different thing. Jesse, I do enjoy hunting Rennie boys over Christmas. Behave, behave. Wayne, I told the Yank that Boxing Day in Oz is when we box. What do you call St. Stephen's Day in Australia? Is it St. Stephen's Day? Because I know in Brazil they don't celebrate. They celebrate nothing on the 26th. And with my first Christmas in Brazil, I was furious because Christmas fell on the Sunday and the bank holiday stayed on the Sunday. So left work on a Friday. I went back to work on a Monday. I had no Christmas holidays. Whereas in Ireland, everything closes because you have two bank holidays, and if they fall on a Saturday or a Sunday, you get you get the Monday and Tuesday. So I was very devastated. Another, I find it weird that we stick someone in the freezer for a few weeks after they shuttle off. Not exactly dignified. Yeah, I find that very strange in England. Another very interesting thing, and it's a big, big historical difference, is when is Christmas celebrated? Um, in Ireland and England, the United States and Australia, the they all have the main celebration. I'm not sure about Germany. They have all the main celebration on Christmas Day itself. Whereas in Portugal, in Spain, Latin America, probably Italy, the main celebration is on the eve. It's a very, and like the Christmas Day is okay. It's a religious day, but like at midnight you have this big, big, big family dinner. They call it a supper, but it's a big dinner, and that's when the presents are given out. Whereas in Ireland, the kids tend to wake up by themselves at 4 in the morning, get their presents, and then you have a big meal, and then you start visiting people for the next 2 days. Loads of parties. Um, no, what else about Christmas? Um, yeah, just it's funny in that everyone now thinks Christmas on the 25th of December, what kind of always has been, and then 6 days later is the New Year. However, again in England and Ireland, that is something new. Yeah, Kat, I went to a couple of countries in South America. Yeah, they have their big celebration on the eve. And I find it also funny having a warm Christmas because Christmas should be dark and cold. And when I was in Brazil, I always felt guilty if I ended up in the swimming pool on Christmas Day. So I felt like God was going to do something bad to me, that it was heretical going being warm and having in a warm swimming pool under warm sun on Christmas Day. That's just too strange for my mind. Jesse, I think it's on the eve in Germany too. I remember Christmas with my girlfriend years ago, rightly. Yeah, I have a feel you could be right. You could be right. Now, everyone nowadays thinks New Year's Day is the 1st of January, but that is relatively new. Yeah, I would love a warm pool right now. It's very cold outside. Until 1750, the New Year's Day in England, and therefore in Ireland and English colonies, the New Year's Day was the 25th of March, um, which was the Feast of the Annunciation, or called Ladies' Day. Uh, so if you're a historian looking through documents, that gets really confusing. First of all, because until 1650 as well, the English were using the Julian calendar. So, if, like, for example, the Battle of Kinsale, everybody thinks the Battle of Kinsale happened on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, 1601. Unless you were Irish or Spanish at the time, when it happened, I think, on the 3rd of January, 1602. The year was different. So the English had 3 months. The first 3 months of the year were the previous year. So it gets very, very confusing. And then you have to do this mad calculation of counting 10 days. Fortunately, in 1750, they they finally decided to join up with Europe, even though many English at the time believed that this was some sort of papist plot. They really didn't want, like, it was Pope Gregory brought in the change in days in the 1560s or something like that. And actually, the Gaelic Irish adopted the new system before the English, 200 years before the English. Um, I've forgotten what I was saying. Yeah, this difference can be very confusing, and it just shows you how things can change. And for some reason, on my social media, I keep getting people discussing whether or not Christmas trees are pagan or have a pagan background, when it seems all the evidence seems that they only started in the 15th century in Germany. So it's a bit funny that way. Jesse, in the Guan Valley beside me in Pembrokeshire, they celebrate New Year Hein Galen on the 13th of January according to the Julian calendar. Oh, 13th of January would have been the 3rd, I think, because it's 10-day difference, 10 or 11-day difference. And in Ireland, until 10 years or so ago, and it could still be the case in England, the tax year began in April. That was because it's 11 days or 10 days after the 25th of March. So when they finally changed the year to beginning to the rest of Europe, the tax year didn't seems not to have changed. So that was a hangover. That was a hangover from that. Now, um, another bit of folklore that seems to be getting less common is candles. In the past, Irish loved candles. Now, many of them, I think, because of insurance, because of fear of fires, many people are using electric candles. But in the past, if you went into any Irish village, or this a week before Christmas and a few days after Christmas, there will be candles in the window. Everywhere you'll see candles. It's supposed to, as far as I know, go back to the idea of the, what you call it, after Jesus was born, his family had to run off to Egypt. I think Herod wanted to kill them. They didn't teach us that part very well in Catholic school. So the idea was you'd put a light in the candle for the Holy Family traveling, and for others traveling. But nowadays it's mainly electrical. So if you're driving around, there's a lot of light, as well as the Christmas lights. You'll see many houses have a light in every candle. It's something I find nice. I don't think it's repeated. It's done in many countries. It's something very Irish. Now, so that's Christmas. If anyone wants to jump in with a, Jesse already has with that Welsh celebration. If anyone else wants to jump in with any other Christmas traditions or histories, please feel free to do so. But let's jump back a bit. So today is the 18th. In 3 days, it is going to be the solstice. Though I know the solstice varies a bit. I think it could be on the 21st. Okay, where I grew up in Massachusetts, candles were a thing. I wonder, is that due to the Irish influence? Because I know that parts of Massachusetts, especially, is it South Boston or North Boston, are very, very Irish. And maybe I don't know if it's in a thing with Italians as well. Um, yeah, so the Irish bringing it over. So the solstice. Um, the solstice, like if you type in winter solstice Ireland into Google now, you'll get a lot of pagan or neo-pagan stuff talking about the solstice. Um, some of it's correct, most of it's supposition, some is wrong. But Newgrange and many other passage tombs are aligned with the winter solstice. You're from the second biggest city in Massachusetts, lots of Irish. I'm going to show my ignorance. I don't know what the second biggest city in Massachusetts is, apart from Boston. All I know in Massachusetts is Boston. Um, and Plymouth isn't that where the Pilgrims are supposed to have landed, the Puritans. Um, Worcester. Okay, though you probably pronounce it funny. Okay. I'd never heard of that place before, apart from the original one. So many megalithic tombs and like standing stones and stone rows are aligned with the solstice. And it's no surprise because all of these were agricultural societies. Um, from the alignment of the tombs, not just with the solstice, with other, like there's a stone row near me aligned with the minor lunar cycle, which is, I think it's 27 or 30-year cycle. And, people able to calculate that, they knew what was going on. They were definitely paying attention to the skies, but they needed to because you're in an agricultural society. You need to know when is it time to plant, when is it time to do the harvest. Um, you also want that when winter is going to start ending, because winter would have been a time when food was getting short. The first couple of months, okay, but you're heading into December. It's been your 6 weeks. You're in the middle of winter. It's cold and wet. Probably your food is starting to run short. So, you want to know when the solstice is, when the page has been turned, for the sun to be there. Um, a lot of people write lots about Gaelic gods, etc. Um, we don't know all that much, but in fact, most of the places that are aligned with solstices, they're pre-Gaelic. They're either late Iron Age, not late Iron Age. They're either Neolithic, like Newgrange, or Bronze Age. So it was a different culture. It wasn't a Gaelic culture, uh, but it's very probable that in some way they worship the sun. I'm not sure if the idea of worship is the best word. The sun was important to them. The sun probably was some sort of deity. Uh, they certainly plotted the movements of the sun. Um, and I'm sure that in a dark Irish winter, you're sitting in somewhere like Newgrange. It was a tomb, but I think it was more than a tomb. Seeing the light come in through that window box and advancing through the advancing along the bottom of the floor and finally hitting the back must have been uh, must have been very, very delightful. Must have been very important, sort of real sense of joy. Kira, you got a lot of no skip ads. You must be very popular. I actually don't know what a no skip ad is. Um, they and actually YouTube don't pay very well for live streams at all. Um, with my long video, you get kind of €5 or €6 for 1,000 views. Uh, Whereas I think to get one, I think I'd need 10,000 views on a live video to get €1, or at least 1,000 to get one video. They don't pay well, and so they show loads of ads. I don't know how many ads. I can't tell. I don't know when an ad comes on, and I actually don't know how ads interrupt me. If an ad comes on, like, am I talking in the future or in the past? I find it a bit strange. Yeah, they were very agricultural. Some would have, like, they would have had cattle, sheep, but they would also have been growing barley and oats. Barley and oats grow well in the Irish climate, but you need to know when to plant. Um, and like, in addition to Newgrange, Knockrow Passage Tomb in Kilkenny, Slieve Gullion, which is Armagh, and Ballycart in Tralee, they're all aligned with the solstice. And then in Cork and Kerry, a lot of the stone rows, and when you have two or three standing stones together, they run along a northeast southwest axis. And it so happens that on the day of the solstice, and kind of a few days before, the sun rises in the northeast and sets in the northwest. So many of these megalithic monuments were aligned roughly with the solstice. I say roughly because they knew how to calculate the solstice, but they would also align them with things in the landscape. Like, to mountaintops seem to have been particularly sacred to the pre-Christian Irish, um, and sometimes the axis of a stone row will move slightly, so it kind of aims straight at a particularly high mountain. And I have a feeling that if you did a lot of work and a lot of research and went to a lot of these stone rows, stone circles, um, on sunny days when you can see properly in the distance, you, by doing three or four in a region, you might be able to calculate the most important sacred mountaintop. It would be a great project to do, but I don't know how I'd convince anyone to do it. They'd probably just laugh at me because it's something very emotive. It's something kind of you have to think a lot about doing. Wayne, need the barley for the whiskey. Indeed, indeed. Though I am not sure if in Bronze Age or Neolithic Ireland they were drinking whiskey. Um, I know that whiskey goes back to the early or mid medieval period, but I don't know how much further it goes back. Um, I'm not good with histories of food and drinks. Mead probably goes back a lot further. Um, yes, Kat, I think you're right there. That's good intuition. One of your past lives. I think it might have been a couple of his past lives. um, so the solstice would have been a very, very important day. Um, how was it celebrated? We really don't know. I mentioned mountaintops. Mountaintops seem to be very, very important. There are several passage tombs on mountaintops. Um, the problem with going to a mountaintop, especially in winter, is the weather can be vile. The Irish mountains are tiny if you compare to, like, is it Denver, Colorado is like a kilometer high or something like that. Uh, the highest mountain in Ireland is not much more than 1,000 meters high, but because they're exposed, you get very strong wind and woeful rain. On my birthday 3 years ago, I was in Dublin. My sister brought me up to show me some in the Dublin Mountains near her. There were a couple of tombs and cairns, and we were supposed to visit two or three. But the weather was just so horrendous. We visited one and then had to run back, and I couldn't even film because the wind was blowing me over. All the footage I got, and which I got completely soaked, was all really really shaky. It was just impossible to stand up straight and film. I had a what you call it a tripod, but that just blew away. The weather, it was really 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 crazy. Um, but I think maybe people, they would know when to go up a mountaintop and when not. Um, like Croagh Patrick, okay, it's associated with Saint Patrick, but I am very sure that it was a sacred site, a sacred mountain, way, 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 way before Saint Patrick. And I actually, and then one thing I find funny when I see people, because in 2 or 3 days, I know my social media because I follow a lot of sites, etc. It's going to be full of people going to celebrate the solstice. And all the clips I watch, they all seem so noisy. There's people bringing barons and drums and trumpets. No one seems to go to one of these ancient sites and just watch the sun come up, watch the sun rise in silence. Um, I don't know if that's something, if it's a human need to make noise in the morning of the solstice, but it's something I feel very, very surprised by. I know if I went to one of these places, if I ever won that lottery and ended up inside Newgrange on the 21st of December, I would just want to sit in silence. And I'm sure if someone started to sing or shout beside me, I might, I'd get very, very annoyed. I was going to say I'd hit them. I wouldn't hit them, but I'd be annoyed. I don't know. I think the solstice requires silence. And just in relation to solstice, it's something because I live now on the very Irish coast. I look out at the Skelligs and the Blaskets, and I can see, I can see over the year how the sun moves. Like at the moment the sun is setting over the Skelligs. In 6 months' time, in the summer solstice, it will be setting over Inishvikalon from where I live. So that's like 90 degrees. And when you grow up in the city where you can't see the horizon, you kind of think the sun always rises in the same spot and sets in the same spot. It doesn't. It moves, and it moves quite a bit, which is important. Kat, I like watching Newgrange on YouTube. Yeah, I think it's you. I think it seems to be everywhere now. They keep putting it. It'll be on RTE. It'll be on YouTube, and I'm fairly sure you choose your social media, Instagram, Facebook. It will be there. It will be there, and like they have live commentary, which is funny. The problem is the weather. I watched it on live a couple of times, and there's just been a little bit of sun, more or less. And I know many people, they do win the lottery, they go down, and because you can win the lottery, it's for more than one day. This phenomenon, I think it's 2 or 3 days each side, and you go down there really early in the morning, you sit there, but half the time you don't see anything. It's too bloody cloudy. Jesse, they should watch out. In the Sumerian version, the Great Flood was brought on by people being too noisy. Yeah, if I ever become religious again, I'm going to look up that religion. I like people being quiet when they're being when they're worshiping. Uh, it's been raining for 2 months here. I'm starting to wonder. Yeah, it's though this last week we've had a few days of sun, and the next couple of days are dodgy, but then it gets better again. It's just very very changeable. My daughter says in her class they all say it's bipolar Ireland. The weather is bipolar because it's just, especially this time of year, you can have sun be freezing, and then it gets like it. I think the day before yesterday was 12 degrees. Today it felt like 3. If it's warmer, it'll tend to rain. It changes a lot. Cat, I've entered that lottery for the past 3 years. Well, I hope you win. I hope you win, because I think it could be easier to win money in a big lottery than to win that lottery. I know no one who's ever done it. Um, Now, let's see, what will I move on to now. If anyone has a question, please feel free. Please feel free to ask. 31 here today and 34 on Christmas Day. Not bad. I got 40 in Brazil, and it was really, really warm. Sorry. Just looking for. I let my histories questions fall. Here's one. The price of cedar and bitumen is knocking up my arc build. Uh, yeah. Well, building an ark is hard at the best of times, especially you want to get 2 of every animal in there. It's going to has to be very, very big, and good timber is expensive. Good timber is expensive. 40 is bad here with humidity. Yeah, well, I'm feeling all nostalgic for heat, because I haven't seen good sun in quite a while. Okay, let's go on to another question. What period of history do you think is most misunderstood by the general public? I'll just throw it out. Like, for example, medieval Ireland, uh, the early Christian period, the Bronze Age, the Tudors, the famine, the early modern period. Which do you think is most misunderstood? Anyone want to shout into the comments? Uh, you could say that they're all misunderstood, because interpretations of history keep changing. Iron Age, famine, okay. Interpretations of history keep changing, especially of the oldest parts where like there's no writing or anything. Over the last few decades, our knowledge of and the picture that they paint of how Ireland came to be settled, the first few generations, has changed enormously. Like when I was in school, they would have talked about Celts, and sort of some Bronze Age stuff, but they never really talked about who they were. No mention of the Beaker people. And now in the Bronze Age, Beaker people are becoming more and more important. And also with the discovery of very old burials, such as in Rathlin Island and ancient DNA, ADNA, they have now got quite a good picture of how Ireland came to be settled. So that you have kind of 3 big waves. The first wave is hunter gatherer in the immediate centuries or millennia after the ice retreats. And then you have an agricultural people, sort of the Neolithic, very roughly, who build Newgrange and some of the other passage tombs. Then you have new people coming in, starting in the European or the Eurasian steppes, possibly where Ukraine is today, working their way probably through Europe, up through France, though there's a possibility they went along to a Mediterranean Europe or both, and then ending up bringing Bronze Age culture. And then the Beaker culture emerges, which seems to have started in some of Scotland's northern islands and worked its way down. So, like Munster was the probably the last place where the Beaker population, the Beaker culture emerges. And that's the last big change in DNA in Ireland. Of course, since then, um, like the Norse coming in, the English coming in, DNA has changed a bit. But as Wayne is pointing out, the Bell Beakers wiped out the Neolithic lot, and they are most of the modern Irish. The second part, yes. The first part, it's hard. They replaced. Did they wipe them out? Were they more popular? We don't really know, and they haven't found many much signs of violence. You know the way sometimes archaeologists dig up a grave, and there's 20 or 30 people, and they all have wounds and stuff. So you know that a battle has gone. These people were killed by violence. There's no evidence of that. But then at that stage, many of the dead would have been cremated. But we know that the Bell Beakers arrive, and then the Neolithic people disappear. It could be that the Neolithic people had run into a crisis and were disappearing, or it could be that Bell Beakers came in such number that they replaced, that they just became so numerous. And then you have the Bell Beaker pop culture, and probably it went through many changes. And then along comes the Iron Age. You mentioned that, Wayne. Um, and although I think the way history has been taught as a series of progressions, the Iron Age at first is like a period of decline. Yes, iron weapons have come in, but in the previous, say, 2,000 years, you have a culture that builds Newgrange and Doubt and Nout and various other big ceremonial buildings. And then you have the beauties and the wonders of Bronze Age Ireland. Like you go to the National Museum in Dublin, you see all the beautiful gold work, the torques, etc. Um, and then you go through a period where there's not much. It's kind of a dark. If you talk about dark ages, that's the dark ages of Irish history, of Irish prehistory. Um, and then it gets transformed with Christianity, and there's a boom, etc. So that is quite misunderstood. Kat, you mentioned the famine. The famine is very misunderstood, and I think it's getting worse. I think um, social media is, I think it pushes simplistic than accounts and ones that are very emotive. So I see it keeps showing me stuff about, oh, the famine wasn't a famine, it was a genocide, which is, oh, really, really, really simplistic, really simplistic. Uh, the famine was extremely complex. It was, for it to have occurred, you couldn't have had planned it. It was so difficult. So many things had to line up. So many things had to go wrong. And if you look at the British government, they weren't competent enough to plan a genocide. Uh, like, and also the one thing that these genocide pushers forget: what was the reason? Ireland was providing 20 or 30% of the British army. The surplus on the land would end up in the army, and that was great because um, with the rise of industrialization in Britain, like in London, the poor living in London, they were getting too weak for the army. In 1900, the time of the Boer War, I think they had to turn down 20 or 30% of recruits because they were too weak to serve. And the British Army, the British Empire needed men. It needed soldiers. It needed lots of them. So it's I don't want to get too much into the famine here because it's coming up to Christmas. I want to talk about nice things. The famine is very, very depressing, and the historiography of the famine is depressing as well. Jesse, you make an interesting point. It kind of spans all history, but the general filthy gloominess of it all is the most striking misconception to my mind. living in Bronze Age roundhouses, for example, hunting, very nice life. Yeah, like if the population is small, um, hunter gatherers have quite a healthy lifestyle. Like, and when you say hunter gatherers, it doesn't mean that they are completely moving all the time. Like, and you'll see in various parts of Europe, and in Gaelic Ireland it was the same. Um, there were many peoples who would move. They like in the summer, their herds would be in one place, and they would move them elsewhere in the winter. So you have a big movement. Hunter gatherers, they would probably move between three or four different places, sort of staying in one for, I don't know, 6 months, a year. Then they have to move on to other because they are wearing down the natural resources. Um, but when the population starts to build up, you need other things like farming. I know there is a Dutch lady. She has an Instagram account. I think it's False History Hunter, and she's very good in medieval history. But she's kind of every day she's posting saying, "Look, medieval people did have baths. Here's a picture. Here's another picture. Here's another picture." And she does some like online criticism of films, and saying, "Look, this is medieval. This is supposed to be medieval Europe." Um, the Flanders was a huge center of cloth, the woolen cloth and other cloths. They would have had all sorts of colorful materials. Um, you would have had amber coming down from the Baltic. So and like this woman, she points out that most films that are set in medieval, they kind of put a, I don't know if you'd call it a filter. Um, Sort of, it's not what they sort of put some sort of filter over the camera, so you see a very grayish, brownish picture, sort of the idea of mud, 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 where many of them would have been very, very clean. Paul, it's probably changed since my day, but I seem to remember for Livingstone, the two core books were Ireland Since the Famine, Lions, and Europe Since Napoleon. So all early history not covered in depth. Yeah, that's what I did, Livingstone history. And although you could have, I think you had an alternative whereby you could have covered early modern and I think Roman stuff. I think most history teachers didn't do that part. They focused on Ireland since the famine and Europe since Napoleon. Um, but I remember in primary school reading lots about Rome, etc., and then I would just buy books myself or go to the library. Um, another a final one that I think is very people have a funny idea of is early medieval Ireland, early Christian Ireland, the land of saints and scholars. There is a book that's still on sale. I think the writer is dead, Cahill. It was when how Ireland saved civilization, or how the Irish saved civilization. In terms of history, it's not good. It advances this idea that Gaelic Irish monks saved knowledge of Roman and Greek manuscripts for Europe. Um, whereas the actual truth is they saved some stuff. They did a lot of good, a lot of very interesting stuff. Um, but his picture is it's bad history. Um, there were a lot of Roman manuscripts scattered around in Byzantium, for one, which only fell in 485, in various Arab empires. I'm not good with the names, but I know, like when Spain was ruled, Spain and Portugal, when they were ruled by the Moors, you had a lot of scholars who were studying Aristotle and stuff like that. There was a big circulation of manuscripts, and the Irish monks, they they from what we can work out, because there's a lot of translations of Roman material, there's very little Greek translated. Um, and there are some Gaelic mythological stories which are based on, for example, Troy, but they're not based on what's his name, Homer. They're not based on Homer. They're based on a version by a Roman poet, which they translated. So they have a very good knowledge of which Roman manuscripts the Gaelic monks would have read, would have copied, would have translated. They didn't have much access to Greek ones for some reason. And at the same time, like under Charlemagne, you had uh, the people call it the Charlemagne or the Carolingian Renaissance. And I know that there was an important Irish philosopher, Don Scotus, went over there and was quite important. Um, but Europe wasn't like with the downfall of the Roman Empire in the West. It didn't mean that Christianity was wiped out in, say, Gaul, in parts of Germany, in Italy. Most of those areas stayed Christian. And the Franks got converted fairly quickly. Yes, there were Irish monks who went over and like um, sort of Columkill in Scotland, Columbanus, and St. Gall, who ended up in Italy and founded some very important stuff. They were important. And this year, I think it closed about 2 months ago, there was a beautiful exhibition in the National Museum of Dublin, whereby I think for the first and only time, they brought a whole pile of material from Switzerland, from St. Gall. I think St. Gall now is a town, and they brought it to Dublin, and the exhibition was very, very well done, very, very well done. There's a book of it which is quite good. Um, so the, the early Christian period was very important, but I think this idea of saving Europe misses the point. Uh, Ireland was outside the Roman Empire, and I think it was the first non-Roman part of Europe to become Christian, and it becomes Christian peacefully. There are some tales that are essentially 19th century or 20th century about St. Patrick killing all the Druids and stuff like that, but that's basically rubbish. Ireland becomes Christian. Ireland, so all of a sudden, you have the educated people in Ireland know Latin. They incorporate the Christian perspective, and they also write down their myths and they alter their myths, which makes Irish mythology, Gaelic mythology, complicated to deal with because we don't know which is pre-Christian. We don't know which was post-Christian. We sometimes it's obvious, like a lot of Cuchulainn, Queen Maeve, um, is very much, to me at least, it seems pre-Christian. The way it's told, etc. Um, J.P. Mallory has done very good work going through these and sort of comparing them to the time. So some scholars have said the Cuchulainn stories are the oldest and they go way, way back. But if you look at the way they talk about chariots, the way they talk about swords, the way they talk about weapons and other things, it's not that old. But you could say that's because people tell these stories, they use the vocabulary that they know. Like if you get say a 10-year-old boy telling a story about his grandfather in World War One, he's going to use the vocabulary he knows. He's not going to use words that have fallen out of fashion because uh, a 10-year-old boy speaking in 1914, his English is going to be very, very different from a 10-year-old boy speaking in 2024. And the same in French, the same in German. Um, but I think that like if you read Cuchulainn, the original, the uncensored version, the guy's completely and utterly crazy. He's the maddest Marvel superhero you could ever think of. You couldn't make a Marvel film out of him because he essentially kills everybody on purpose or by accident. He's always killing his friends, like they're chatting away and suddenly he just chops their head off by accident or because he gets annoyed. It's mad. Whereas some of the other stories, like Lara Gabala, we know a lot of that. That's the Book of Invasions. A lot of that is Christian because they tie the Gaelic origin into the biblical account, into essentially copy the story of Moses. The same that other people in Europe were doing. Okay, Jesse. Across the board, the homogeneous lifestyles depicted for periods seem off for me. Pockets of hunter-gatherer culture alongside pastoralists may have gone on for centuries. Yeah, yeah. Like, um, sort of history too often is kind of taught as a frozen picture. Uh, like, I like military history, but I find many military history books boring because they have this idea. Okay, this is the Napoleonic army, and all the French are wearing blue and white or whatever, and they all have green buttons. However, that may have been true in Paris in front of the emperor, but 5 minutes down the road, at least three men would their buttons would have burst off. A month down the road, they would be wearing they'd all be covered in mud, change uniforms would be torn, things change. And yeah, like different cultures exist. Um, like take under Elizabeth Protestant, etc. Most of northern England would have been Catholic until almost the end of her reign. Um, and I'm not sure if she ever went to the north of England. There is a writer, what's his name? He's an English writer, and I think it could be. I haven't seen it. He has a kind of detective novel set in the period of Henry VIII. Sherlock, something like that. Sherlock. They've made a series of it. I only read one or two, but there was one set in the post Pilgrim of Grace period. The Pilgrim of Grace, I don't know whether English people study it much in school. It was this massive rebellion against Henry VIII for Catholicism. And the fact that it was called the Pilgrim of Grace, thousands of common people, they all basically joined together, forced local lords to join them. And they wanted to persuade, they weren't rebelling against Henry, they were rebelling against his counselors. They wanted to persuade him to undo the Reformation and bring back the religion they believed in, which was good for them. It was very, very, very dangerous for Henry. It cost him a lot of money, except like he pretended to be nice to them, to the leaders, and he forgave them all, etc. Then turned around, arrested them, and killed them, and then smashed it. And this one about is this guy going to the north of England, I think to York Cathedral, which was destroyed by Henry's soldiers, and he's portraying a different country from the country than from London. The same in France. Some people say until the French Revolution, there was like French was only really spoken in Ile-de-France around Paris. In the south, Languedoc, Provençal, other ones in the very north, other types of French, Breton. No country was homogeneous. No country was homogeneous. Um, I remember seeing a piece in a cave that had family living in until a few centuries ago. Long crossover periods on the fringes, the borderlands, old traditions. Yeah, sort of everywhere in Europe you have these borderlands. Like people talk about the Pale in Ireland, but by the end of the Tudor period, most of the peasants in the Pale, perhaps with the exception of Wexford, would have been Irish speaking. And you have these March families, like some of which are still around, like Lord Plunkett in Dunsany. He's an interesting guy. He's let his what's left of his estate grow wild. They regard themselves as English, but they would all have been bilingual, and they were able to move in the Gaelic world and the English world. In the same in Wales, you had the people being able to speak both. The Campbells, the Earl of Argyll was able. He had a Highland side and a Lowland style. All over Europe, you had this idea, this these marches, these margins. Okay, the time is basically running out, so I'm going to start winding down. I said at the beginning, I'm hoping to get a video out at the weekend. Hopefully on the just me talking a bit about the winter solstice because it's coming up, and then hopefully about a week after that, I will have a video out about Valencia history, and then I know that tomorrow night I'll be doing a live with the two guys, with me, Hoff and Clans and Dynasties, and Philip from Irish medieval history, and then will stop for a week or two. I Next Tuesday is my birthday, so I may do. I'll have to see how it goes next week because we're trying to finish up our works, etc. So it's been a bit chaotic, but maybe I'll try and do one of these questions and answers next week. I'll put up on YouTube when I'm going to do it. I just have to think about it and find the best day. It's hard to find a good day in Christmas week, but I'll try and do one in Christmas week. And so I will wind down then, and I'll say, Ihawa, happy Christmas to everyone, Nolag Hona Div, and happy solstice. And I hope you all, hopefully, the solstice on the 21st will be a sunny day, at least in the morning. So those of you who watch the Newgrange solstice will see something beautiful. So I will say good night then, Sloan. Thanks, Kat. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Kira. Thanks, Wayne. Is that everybody? And thanks, everybody else. And I will see you soon. Bye bye, Sloan. Thanks, Kira. Merry Christmas and happy solstice.